This is Exit Stage Left, Faust in a Time of Plague by Jakeman, who happens to be my cousin. And it's read by me, Richard Digby Day. And if you want to know anything about me, you can look it up on Wikipedia. Jane wants to dedicate this version of her story to the memory of Darroll Pardoe. I was once in a fine troupe, though you may not think I could ever have been richly dressed, playing the lead parts and generally acting as manager also, employing the actors, choosing the pieces, and of course, keeping a sharp eye on the takings. That summer was the last when, well, never mind, it was many years ago. We'd left London when the plague bills grew worse by the week and audiences stayed away from crowded places such as theatres. We were travelling round the country, our costumes stacked on carts, giving plays at inns, in great houses, in colleges, wherever they would take a piece or two. We gave a few histories, the Henrys, with old swords and rusty armour, but the yokels cheered, and a knockabout by Decker, I remember. These pleased more than the tragedies, though sometimes a noble lord would have us play Titus or Romeo and Juliet in his hall. That year, we stopped at the Bear, a large inn on the other side of the city. It was a fine house, the Bear, a great place with stabling and ostlers and galleries all round the courtyard, though it's vanished now. Not a stick or stone remains, but a bare and empty place where it stood. At the Bear, we gave 3 comedies. The Night of the Burning Pestle was one, always a crowd pleaser, and I think The Dream was another. And we had a handsome boy with us who was a good Rosalind in As You Like It. But we did not intend giving a tragedy at the Bear, for the landlord said his customers wanted nothing but laughs and bawdy. We were content enough with this, the clowns doing tricks and jigs, and thought to ride out our time away from London with easy pennies. But one morning, the landlord sent for me to his private chamber, deep inside the inn, which had its own entrance. In the normal way of things, he was a jovial fellow, or at least put a good show of it, as a man who wants to sell ale must do. For who wants to drink with a miserable whey-face staring at them over the barrels? Yet I saw as he entered that this was not his usual countenance. His face was serious. His eyes seemed to be avoiding mine. The room, heavy curtained, seemed very quiet after the bustle of the yard outside. "I've sent for you to ask you to perform for a special request," he began, and seemed to have difficulties going on. I thought perhaps he wanted a mucky tale, but surely an innkeeper would not be shy about asking for such a thing. "The shoemaker's holiday," I suggested. "We could plenty of prick the garter into that." He did not even smile, but continued with as solemn an expression as before. "It's best you meet the gentleman. He's here." "Where, do you mean?" I was about to ask. But a tapestry behind the innkeeper was pulled aside and a man stepped forward. He was dressed in black velvet with a few gold-tipped lacings and had high riding boots and fine gloves, all of sable. His face was first in shadow, but as he moved towards me, I instinctively tried to see more of it, as though all my nerves were shrieking. But all I could see was a high, pale forehead and a long red mouth in white jaws. The eyes were dark, yet bright, small, like those of a fox or a bear, and threatening in a close animal-like stare, as if assessing the vulnerability of his prey. I could not take my gaze away, though I was aware of the innkeeper edging towards the door. The stranger said in a quiet enough tone, though I could not have disobeyed that voice to save my very soul, "You are the leading person of the actors?" There was something foreign about the way he spoke, but I could not identify it. Northern Europe, German perhaps, or still further off? Yes, Your Excellency. My title does not matter. What parts have you given? Kings mostly, sire. I recovered some confidence with this and raised my hand with a touch of royal gesture. After all, I trod the London stages as various Henrys, an Edward and a Richard into the bargain. A Tamburlaine, perhaps? Or the massacre at Paris? Plays by Marlowe, that starry lad cut off in his prime with a blade through the eye socket. This was what that fellow wanted then, blood and guts, Jews falling into cauldrons. Well, we could give him that, though perhaps the playwright is a little dark for the present, my lord. His voice was sharper. I have told you before, my title is none of your concern. Well, that wasn't exactly what he had said, but if he wanted to keep it a secret, well, that would be fine by me, as long as he came up with the brass. I might get the pig's blood we'd need for any play by Marlowe cheap enough here. I bowed abjectly, and he nodded as if in satisfaction and continued, "Have you ever given Faustus?" That startled me. I hadn't thought a play about a renegade scholar would be fitting for a local inn, nor that it would be the taste of the stable boys, ruffians, and farmhands who were the most part of our usual audience now. But I had, in London, once studied the lead part, Dr. Faustus, who sold his soul to the devil for infinite riches and power, and for knowledge, yes, for that as well. Marlowe gave him speeches of tremendous length. I could recall some lines here and there. My actor's instinct overcame my fear. I took up a stance and declaimed, "Is this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burned the topless towers of Ilium? Sweet Helen, make me immortal with a kiss." He stepped back and he put his hands together as though there were no sound of applause. I see you are familiar with the role. Now, this is the very play I wish you to perform. But sir, it's not what we're contracted to do here. Our obligations. Don't worry about mine host. I will compensate him amply, I assure you. And it will be for just one performance. I stared at the expressionless mask in front of me. Damn it. There was no way of judging his reactions, his real humor. Old theatre stories about Christopher Marlowe were flashing through my mind. His brilliance, his drunkenness, his book learning, how he sat up all night in his chamber, writing, rewriting, sometimes with strange visitors tapping on his door, people that none of the actors ever saw. The man in front of me dispersed these thoughts with an oath. "Christ's blood, give me an answer." There was an odd tone in his voice, and suddenly I understood, and I felt a reversal, what the ancients called peripateia. Yes, you see, I had good education before I took to this cursed trade. The balance of our conversation had changed. This richly dressed and arrogant man wanted something from me, something I could give to him at a price. "We might be losing a night's takings," I said cautiously, perhaps not to be too demanding straight away. For an answer, he pulled the curtain from which he had emerged so that it was fully open. disclosing a chair and a table on which stood a small chest. Going to this last, he pulled open the lid and beckoned me over. As if I were a toy pulled on a string, I followed his hand. On the top was a layer of gold coins. Run your hand through them, he said. Even as I put my finger towards the coins, I knew that this might be a fatal act. If I so much as laid a hand on his gold, I would take whatever he gave me. It would seal some kind of bargain. The coins gleamed, reflecting the dim light. They had a beautiful warmth to the touch. It didn't take long to settle the details. You'll need a scholar's gown for the part, he said, and I realized I'd not thought of any of the usual practicalities, how we were to stage the play, who would take which roles and so forth. I ran it through in my head. I'd give Lucio his chance as Mephistopheles. Lucio is a former priest. I suspect a disgraced one, who has a fine, seductive voice, quiet, yet insistent. The character of Valdez would be easily settled. It's not much of a part anyway. Anyone who did courtiers could do it. Lucifer appeared, of course. Faustus signed the deadly contract with him, the Lord of Darkness himself, to whom Mephistopheles was a mere servant. Our half-Spanish lad, Felipe, was tall and imposing, with that touch of the night about him. He'd do Lucifer excellently. The play has a clown, Robin, and we had a good comic who could do knockabout with the best. The boy who played Rosalind had a Cleopatra costume that would do well for Helen, who doesn't speak anyway. But I shall need small devils, I said. There are plenty of them in the script playing about Faustus and costumes for them. Back in London, these imps could easily have been supplied by schoolboys given a licensed truancy by some friendly master. I could see his long lips curve in a smile. You will have some choir boys, he said. And I remembered we were in a cathedral city with red breeches and jerkins, and we will have some little impish horns made and with wild shaggy wigs, easily contrived with goat's hair. Yes, I think they will do very well for your devils. I was astonished by his care for detail. Perhaps he was a man who knew something about the theatre himself. But when, I began, when will this unusual performance take place? You will find you can be ready more quickly than you think. Shall we say in 3 days' time? Surely an impossibility. But it was not a question. Our troupe would be hard-pressed to learn the piece, but we'd have to try to obey him. That was clear. He'd not done with me, however. One more question, please, master player. I composed my features into an appropriately subservient, waiting expression. But the question was so unexpected, it made me forget my composure. In fact, I gasped as I heard it. Do you believe in hell? Hell. That realm of little black creatures depicted on the wall of the church. Hell. That punishment threatened in the Latin mumbo-jumbo of the old religion to those who did not eat some biscuit made by a baker. It had long seemed nonsense to me, that painted inferno, a threat to children, no more. I answered readily, with no thought for the consequences. No, there's no such place. As the words left my mouth, I thought to myself, damn, now he'll probably cancel the whole show. He was of the old religion, I'll be bound. But to my surprise, he laughed, throwing his head back and I saw his wet mouth open wide, as if to swallow some choice piece of meat dangling above him like an eager dog. "Excellent," he said. "You will find the parts in your room." He vanished behind the curtain. And indeed, when I got up the stairs to my small hellhole, the landlord did not think that even a leading actor merited anything better. There on my truckle bed lay a book. I picked it up in astonishment. It was a prompt book for Faustus. An actor will not need an explanation of such a thing, but this one was remarkably complete, with all the entrances, exits, and props needed for every scene carefully noted down. It would save hours of laborious work. There were loose sheets of paper lying on the bed, and I realized they were the several parts, all handwritten and ready for the actors to study. This must have taken some preparation. He knew in advance, I said to myself, and somehow I felt ashamed that the man had anticipated that I would be so quickly bought. The days after my strange interview passed in a whirlwind, and at the end I was reasonably confident that everyone knew his words and could more or less improvise if necessary. Furthermore, the carpenters had carefully prepared a stage trapdoor through which, at the end of the play, I had planned that Faustus would go down to hell for all eternity. It would make a much more dramatic finale than having him just dragged off by the demons, as Marlowe's stage direction provided. And I was sure this new contrivance would astonish the yokels. Working to my instructions, the carpenters had lifted the planks to form the stage about 5 feet above the courtyard of the Bear and boxed it into the front with the trap set in the center. It was bolted securely across, but the bolts could swiftly be withdrawn and the hapless Faustus would fall through onto the old feather mattress set beneath. I checked all this myself, as it would be that I must fall through my own limbs at hazard. I looked at the mattress and even oiled the bolts to make sure they wouldn't squeal when they were pulled back, for nothing spoils a dramatic effect more than your everyday screeching. At the back of the stage, I had them make a small cabin to serve as Faustus' study. Here I had a warning that something beyond my control or conscience might be occurring. Overnight, there appeared unsolicited some props on a table in Faustus' study. There were some books, of chemistry chiefly, a human skull, and an alembic full of a cloudy liquid. A curtain of red and gold hung at the side, ready to be pulled back and forth as required for the scenes. No one knew how these items had come upon the stage, though I could guess from the richness of the curtain cloth and the fine binding of the books that it was my mysterious patron who would not give his name or title. I drilled the cathedral choir boys in their roles. "Now, lads, you're to be young demons, do you understand?" They understood only too well and capered about. "Like painted devils on the wall beside the altar?" asked one eager young monkey, and the others joined in. "Yes, sir. Can we prod the fat ones with these pointy things?" Oh, yes, sir. And can we set off firecrackers? Can we pinch the good wives on the... To which the answers were yes, yes, and yes, but to take care with the wives, for I didn't fancy a group of angry townsmen chasing us out of town. So we progressed, and I had a good Mephistopheles in Lucio, the disgraced cleric, who'd found fortune in the theatre and had that low, insistent tone that carries so well and drives fear right up into the galleries, far more effective than all your ranting and raving. As Helen, the boy who played women's parts, had a passable blonde wig, he had only to cross the stage after all, and the smaller parts were quickly distributed and conned, for our company was well used to learning their book at short notice. I, of course, as Faustus, would have to carry the great speeches, but then I already had them off and just cast my eye over them. I confess that as I did so, I felt a strange sensation, as if someone was looking over my shoulder. But I was sure I was alone in the chamber at that moment. We were ready, or as ready as any company ever is to give a play new to them, for there's always uncertainty. What will they applaud? Will there be booing, possibly deeply unpleasant objects flying towards the stage? But I had it planned out. The boys would play other parts beside the demons, you understand? The 7 deadly sins appear in this play. The older lads would do very well, dressed as the sins. And then there are friars who caper about the Pope when he is insulted by Faustus. But at the end, they would throw off any cloaks or gowns and appear in the red costumes provided for them by our patron, who, by the way, I half expected to see as we rehearsed, perhaps observing to make sure his instructions had been complied with. But he didn't appear until the very noon of the day of the performance, and then not in the courtyard. I was sent for to the landlord's lodging once more, and again, clad as before in black, he emerged before me. But on the table in this time, I saw a folded cloth. He gestured to me, and I understood I was to shake it out. It was white, though somewhat yellowed with age, and of a fine weave, but frayed and warm, and the writing on it was a sort of blackish brown, much faded, and as if the brownish colour had been traced over with the black to make it stronger somehow. I do not express it well, but that was how it struck me, that the writing was an imperfect human thing, yet overcome by something far more powerful. I do not know what the letters were. Certainly this was not the Latin that Marlowe gives in the play for Faustus' conjuring, though I recognize some Greek letters. But this was older, more fantastic. There were creatures, men with dogs' heads, snakes with limbs, yet somehow real, potent, though I could not understand it. I asked our mysterious patron if I was to use his cloth for the conjuration scene. Absolutely. You will not get your pay else, master actor. But now, how can I explain this? It was not money only that drove me on. Of course, I wanted the gold. It would have got me out of staying in inns such as this forever. I could have set up my own theatre. But I was also curious. Who was he? Why should I use his cloth? In spite of my fear, these questions were spurs to my inquiring mind. Come to think of it, that was the main motive, I think, that led Faustus to destruction. Not lust, not greed, but the desire for knowledge. The magnificent presumption of that wish. I understood him well, the character I played. There was something else I had to do. Our patron gave me a strip of parchment very curiously twisted, and bade me open it. There were words written on it, but in no tongue I understood. I asked him what I was to do. Mouth them, man. It does not matter if you understand them or no. Instead of Master Marlowe's dog Latin, just make the sounds written down there. I folded up the paper and the cloth and took them away. We had a full house, if you can call a crowded inn yard, with upper galleries packed out. The occasional neighing from the stable, the dirty whistles from apprentices, they were expected interventions. At the start, I looked around to see if the man who brought about this whole performance was sitting in the audience. But I forgot him as we began the play, and the first strange sensation did not come till I started to speak the incantation whereby Faust summons Mephistopheles. Now that the gloomy shadow of the earth, longing to view Orion's drizzling look, leaps from the Antarctic world into the sky and dims the welkin with her pitchy breath, Faustus, begin thy incantations, and try if devils will obey thy hest. I spread out the cloth on the stage and stood in its center. I felt it was a crazy thing, but I tell you, there was a burning heat under the cloth, as if my feet were standing on coals. The speech went on, calling Mephistopheles to be my servant. I say the speech went on because I felt as if I were no longer uttering it, though it was coming out of my mouth, speaking through me. That's the only way I can describe it. I longed to stop, but I could not. That incantatory verse came pouring through my body. Speaking in tongues, that's how the Bible puts it. Only God, or more probably the devil, knew what tongue I was speaking at that moment. I pulled out the paper I'd been given and heard myself reading those strange words written upon it. But my voice still seemed to belong to someone or something else. And from then on, I felt, perhaps I saw, just out of a corner of my eye, maddeningly always out of sight as I turned my head, something hanging like a dark shape, a smoky rope, perhaps, that shifted always as I tried to glimpse it. As Marlowe provided, I conjured Mephistopheles out of hell, and Lucio leapt out of the trap as we had planned. The audience, country people who'd never seen a trick before like that, gasped. And so did I. For what I saw was that Lucio, that friendly and familiar companion, was altered. The silly little horns he'd tied on his head for the part of Mephistopheles seemed to turn into a great pair of twisted antlers, and his face oozed a horrible, fawning, false civility. I was afraid that the scene would stop there and then, brought to a halt by the change in him. But we only seemed to pause for a minute, and then he was Lucio again, just an actor, dressed up in robes and peering through the eye holes of a plaster mask. And so the play went on. You know what happens, what Mephistopheles says, those terrible words. What had possessed Marlowe to put them in the mouth of this lesser demon? Where are you damned? In hell. How comes it then that thou art out of hell? Why, this is hell, nor am I out of it. The full meaning of the words struck me then as I had never thought of them before. This is a terrible idea, is it not? That we are already there, that hell is all around us. The learned Dr. Faustus had not believed in hell, surely, and neither had I. But at that moment, I swear the smoky, coiled thing writhed as if with delight, like a water snake that senses it's in its own element. But there was more. Later in the play, Faustus has to sign a paper. He's discovered in his study preparing to sign a bond with Mephistopheles' master. And as I heard Lucifer's voice, then I knew it was the Lord, the man who had initiated all this, who had put the golden coins in front of me and given me that cursed figured cloth to throw down on the stage. As I faced him, I could see his eyes glinting through the holes in the mask. And they were the eyes of, the best I can say is that they were the eyes of an intelligent beast, not human, no, but staring and searching my face, staring at me as if observing. They were bright, small, and quite without any feeling, as if there were some sort of prey to be studied before it was seized and dragged into a den. I thought to myself, he did this to see what would happen, what I would suffer if I used his damned conjurations. And more, I realized why he had asked me if I believed in hell, and I had readily told him I did not. He was going to teach me something, to play with me as if I were an animal that does not understand the world it moves in. This was some kind of experiment to him, as if he was an alchemist working with his pipes and alembics and secret books of knowledge, the very objects he'd loaned me for the play. I had some courage, though, and I hissed at him under my breath, but close enough to his ear. You durst not perform this yourself. You made me your toy, your puppet, to see what would result. But the voice continued with the words of Lucifer in the play, which persuade Faustus that the devil will carry out this bargain, fly him across the world, place him with dukes and lordlings, have him meet the emperor himself. Lucifer, that great Satan, the fallen angel who rules in hell. For 24 years, Faustus may have anything he desires, every wealth and luxury, the most beautiful woman in the world to be his harlot. But when the time is up, at the stroke of midnight, he must yield his soul to Lucifer, and the bond must be signed in Faustus' own blood. I'd planned to sign the paper with a great flourish. I had a little vial of pig's blood concealed in my cloak to spray about and make the groundlings gasp. But instead, I found myself, I still cannot understand how I came to do this, only the thing above me, this smoky, knotted creature, it stirred again. And it was whispering, sounds I could not understand, not human, murmurs that fell into my ear, but could only have been heard on stage, not by the audience. I think that explained what happened next. I took the knife and cut my own arm. I felt the pain, and yet I had a kind of exultation with it. I could see the eyes of Felipe, who played Lucifer, looking at me with astonishment through his demon's mask, and I saw my own blood running red along my skin and dripping into that damnation cloth on which it stood, in the grip of something that seemed like a nightmarish sleepwalking. And even as the pain of the cut was stinging into my flesh, I signed my bond to Lucifer and saw my blood stand wet and shining upon the page. There was a moment when no one moved, as if all were shocked into silence. And then Felipe took the sheet of parchment from me and waved it triumphantly in the air at a bit of business we'd arranged in advance. And we snapped back into the play and continued with our lines. From then on, the thing I had sensed overhead in Fausta's study, hanging as if it were ready to drop down like a snake from a tree, moved out into the theatre as if it was given new life. At times, I thought I saw it suspended by long fingers from the wooden posts of the balconies. Then it seemed, as far as I could catch it with my eye, to scramble along over the heads of the groundlings crowding below. There were moments, of course, when I forgot it during the rest of the performance. The choir boys, dressed as devils, came on, armed with little wooden tridents, and they ran from the stage and went among the crowd, upsetting the fruit, teasing the wives, pulling up skirts, blowing off farts, all that sort of thing. They had squibs and little charges of powder to let off as they ran about. Oh, they were a great success. And Helen was fine, wafting across the stage quite gracefully in spite of the inevitable whistles and catcalls. But it was towards the end, when Faustus seeks to repent. He calls on Christ, but who appears masked, horned, with a great black cloak swirling about him? Great Lucifer himself, archdemon, and he speaks these terrible lines. Christ cannot save thy soul, for he is just. There's none but I have interest in the same. Gradually, I took up my part again, and the impression of this strange being within Lucifer's costume faded away with the playing, as angels and devils capered about and buffeted holy friars and the 7 deadly sins paraded around. The audience were loving it, roaring at the firecrackers and tricks with gauze and draperies. Poor groundlings, they'd never seen a play by a London company before. So I recovered a little, at least, until our gong has struck the hour of 11. And then, with Faustus, I remembered what would come. You know what happens. One of the finest moments in the entire world of theatre, when Faustus must face the expiry of his bond with the devil. He's enjoyed 24 years of wealth, lust, absolute knowledge, everything he could desire. Now, at midnight, his time will be up. Lucifer will claim his soul and take him straight to hell. He waits fearfully for the clock to strike. Lente, lente, currite noctis equi. Slowly, slowly run, ye horses of the night. The gong would be struck 12 times while I gave the great speech, the last stroke being as Faustus is dragged off by the devils. I began. Ah, Faustus, now hast thou but one bare hour to live, and then thou must be damned perpetually. As I spoke, I saw coils of smoky grey forming above me, and within them such faces, eyes, horns, as might drive a man mad. They hovered in the air, and I knew they were waiting for me to finish the speech. This would be their moment, these creatures forming over the rough-hewed stage below. Yet I could not stop, must go through my lines to the bitter end. The clock struck the half, and the solemn tones reverberated through the entire place, up to the galleries and all around the courtyard of the inn. And the audience was hushed. I'd never known the like. There's always some fidgeting, some joshing, maybe an apprentice who fancies himself as a jester starts jeering. But in those minutes, all was still. I swear the air did not move. I forced myself on as Faustus sees the agonies of hell awaiting him and knows there is no escape. He has signed the bond, and Lucifer will claim his soul. And then Marlowe writes, oh yes, how well I knew that stage direction. The clock strikes 12. It is the moment of no escape. I was nearing the end of the speech, and with it, Faustus' last moments on earth. The crackers we had planned to accompany Faustus' damnation began to explode, and spurts of flame from fuses and gunpowder pockets shot up round me. The gong struck 12, slowly, as I had instructed. Faustus shrieks in desperation. Ugly hell, gape not. Come not, Lucifer. I'll burn my books. Onto the stage, the devils poured, surrounding me. And as I looked in their faces, God help me, I had a glimpse of damnation. Instead of those innocent choir boys' eyes, shining and youthful, I saw cruelty, hatred, every kind of cunning and malice that has affected the human race. Even their hands had changed into hooked and pointed things that would catch and pull as they dragged me away. Well, you know what happens next. Exeunt devils with Faustus. Traditionally, as in the old church plays, they pull him off stage left to hell. That is the devil's zone in the moralities and pantomimes. Hell mouth gapes to the left. But something saved me. Well, more or less, for you see the broken thing I am now, where once I stood tall and proud, the hero of any performance. You recall I had departed from Kit Marlowe's stage instructions in one particular. He says Faustus is to be dragged off by devils. In my plan, he would fall down into a fiery pit below. I'd arranged the trapdoor contrivance. It would be so much more dramatic an ending if Faustus were to tumble through it. And as I staggered with those horrible hands clawing at my cloak, I knocked with my heel upon the stage. I managed to give the triple knock, the signal. Young Barnaby and Roger, God be thanked, heard it below and slid out the beams holding the trap. Down I tumbled. My cloak was on fire. My arms were slashed and bleeding, and all around me seemed to be bursting into flames. That was how the inn came to burn down to the ground. It was never rebuilt. I carry the scars to this day. But the boys saved me. They dragged me out. They took me to what they knew was a place of safety, their school and refuge. They laid me in the cathedral before the altar. I lived there for a year or more, hiding in the cloisters from I don't know what terrors. The boys brought me food and a man skilled in medicine. I think he was a former monk. He dressed my burns. I have never returned to the stage.